As a kid, Albert Vaughn was a firebug, which got him into scores of trouble. Albert was in and out of various detention facilities all through his adolescence, mostly in. But whenever he had a chance, Albert honed his craft. His love for fire had only grown. The more he learned about it, the more he experimented with it. Until one day he was a full-blown arsonist with a passion for his job. They say, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Well, Albert was living proof of that. He'd never held down a real job, and once he learned that there were people who would pay him money to burn shit to the ground, he never had to hold down a real job. And this was a good thing. Albert was a nonconformist in a lot of ways. He was a massive chunk of a man, the kind that hides heavyweight champion strength under layers and rolls of flab. He was wild and unkempt, and often had bits of his last meal crusted into his beard. Albert was fond of booze and prostitutes, and was an altogether unpleasant man to be around. Because of that, Albert only had work contacts, never any friends. Until he met Danny Miller. Danny had also been in and out of facilities his whole life, although in Danny's case they were facilities of the mental care and criminally insane variety. Danny was in his early 20s, same as Albert, but he had the affect of an 11-year-old boy, maybe a late-blooming 13. Danny was slim and wiry with a mop of dull red hair and a snaggle tooth that propped up one corner of his upper lip. Danny thought girls were gross. He liked cartoons and video games. He ate breakfast cereal for every meal that he possibly could. Danny also knew how to handle a knife better than anyone Albert had ever seen. He could use a gun, any gun, instinctively the first time he touched it. He could perfectly mimic the moves of anyone that he was around, or even people that he saw on TV. Despite his good nature, Danny was a savant in the art of death, a natural-born killer. You could say that it was in his blood. These two men could not have been more different, but they quickly became fast friends. Danny and Albert would soon become notorious hired killers, known as the Stain and the Burn. Drinking whiskey in the kitchen and telling scary stories around the fire. Music, monsters, and mayhem. Killers, cannibals, and cults. Fearful fiction and furious fact. Tall tales and terrifying truths. This is a scary home companion. Although it was a very simple job, it was an important one. Someone had to be made an example of in the biggest, messiest, and most terrifying way possible. This made it perfectamundo for Danny and Albert. You see, there was a local pornographer who had run afoul of his criminal superiors. In this city, there were many such pornographers, but the man who owned Stained Sheets Productions had decided to go into business for himself. and to do so in a most distasteful way. Word had gotten out that this man had made a few films featuring young talent. Pre-teens, barely in the double digits. Even in the foulest criminal underworld, there are certain boundaries that need to be respected and upheld. A mob boss might have no personal moral objection to child sexual abuse, but if they let it happen on their watch, it sends a message to everyone about who they are. Because there are bad guys, and then there are certain stripes of bad guys who deserve no quarter, even in the filthiest and most depraved criminal underworld. With that in mind, Danny and Albert were dispatched to the office studio of Stained Sheets Productions. They were to make a big mess out of the producer and destroy all evidence of his horrid crimes. The message got sent that night, loud and clear. Too loud and too clear. Danny had his favorite knives, the ones that he had seen on the late-night TV infomercials, and he was torturing the producer. In the process of said torture, Danny accidentally saw part of one of the man's movies. And to put it mildly, it upset him. He kept cutting away at the producer until the man gave up the names of the editor, the stagehand, the boom mic operator, the cameraman, and every other adult who had appeared alongside the children. Danny got every name, every address, and helpful pictures of most of them. And then he gave all that stuff to Albert because remembering things, that wasn't Danny's strong suit. All through the night, Danny and Albert traveled the city, leaving a trail of magnificently dead and mangled corpses in their wake. For years afterward, no one in that city even thought about fucking around with kids. So, job well done. But in the immediate aftermath, it was a media circus and a shitload of extra scrutiny from the law. It became clear that as valuable a weapon as Danny and Albert were, they were far too unpredictable. They drew too much heat, and heat was bad for business. The boys were paid their usual fee, plus a heavy bonus to cushion the blow that they were being asked to leave town. Asked. Strongly encouraged, perhaps, but not told, not ordered. They wouldn't fucking dare. Not at this point. Danny's exploits that night are what earned him the nickname The Stain. Not because of Stained Sheets Productions, but because that was all that he left behind when he was done. A stain. The problem about hiring the devil to do your dirty work is that after that, the devil knows your name. Fortunately for the mob bosses, neither Danny nor Albert had any desire to stick around that city any longer. With this much money, they didn't have to. In a battered old pickup truck laden with gas cans and cigarette butts, they hit the open road. They didn't have a plan other than finding a place to eat that served Lucky Charms, and a whorehouse with low enough standards to let Albert through the front door. there was someone else, a man who did have a plan in mind for Danny and Albert. His name was Jonestown. He was an agent for the shadow organization called Deep Red Ops. And Jonestown knew more about Danny Miller than anyone else alive. The DRO caught wind of Danny's crime spree and took a closer look. Jonestown approached the director and told him that the first wave experiment was finally paying dividends. Danny Miller was one of their creations, and now he was living up to the potential that Jonestown had always dreamed about. At this point in time, the first wave experiment had been shut down for several years. Funding cuts. The DRO brass wanted money for more brain slug research. But Jonestown had been keeping loose tabs on all of his boys, with a special eye on Danny and his innate abilities. The director wanted Danny brought in. Let's test him out. Let's see what he can really do. Let's see what kind of asset he is. Respectfully, Jonestown argued that wasn't a wise course of action. Danny Miller had developed in the wild, so to speak. He was a stone's throw away from being feral and completely codependent on his partner. Danny was prone to extremely dangerous outbursts. So Jonestown wanted a little more time to watch Danny in his natural environment, evaluate him more closely, and then figure out the best way to approach him and bring him in. Jonestown was given more time, but the clock was ticking. Of course, Danny and Albert didn't know any of that. All they knew was they had a fat stack of cash and an open road. Since neither of them were prone to looking at maps, and go fuck yourself if you think they were going to stop and ask for directions. Besides, directions to where? They just drove till they found a town, but one quick pass told them the town was too square, so they drove to the next town, and the next, until they were in another state, and they landed in a crumbling industrial complex called Carthage. Carthage was the kind of urban skeleton where the bars, strip clubs, and brothels were numerous, where the police were few and far between, and where the low-tide stink of economic depression blanketed the streets like smog. In other words, it was a Danny and Albert kind of town. Albert found a squalid little boarding house where you could pay for a couple of weekly rooms with cash and no ID. "Hey," Albert said to the clerk behind the bulletproof glass. 2 rooms. You got cable? You got that channel shows cartoons all the time?" "Nah, just pornos mostly." "How much?" "For the pornos?" "For cartoons, asshole." Don't know. Have to ask the boss." Albert slapped $200 on the counter. "I want cartoons in the room." "Or else what, tough guy?" "Or else what? Or else I come back and I crack your fucking head open. Let's back alley tango and see what hits the floor, you fuck-faced piece of shit." Maybe it was the threats of a raging behemoth, maybe it was the $200. Who can say? But Danny had Cartoon Network in his room the following afternoon. And he loved it. Albert loved it too. Now he was freed up to go find some female company, a few bottles of brown party liquor, and hell, maybe even an 8-ball or 2. They had the money, after all. For the next couple of weeks, Danny and Albert were on easy street. Wall-to-wall Hanna-Barbera, McDonald's burgers, and outcalls from the lowest tier of local working girls. 2 blocks away was a strip club with an old Galaga arcade game in the back. For a roll of quarters and a fistful of dollars, it was a hell of a way to spend a lazy Sunday. Since they had money, they had no reason to work. Albert would go out and set little fires here and there just to scratch that itch. But without the intrinsic motivation of money, they really didn't get into any criminal shit. Eventually, the DRO ran out of patience. Jonestown's advice was overruled, and the director decided to bring the asset Danny Miller in from the cold to see what he could really do. The DRO sent in their A-team, the frontline soldier unit called Murder One. 25 battle-hardened war agents capable of capturing or killing anyone alive. Right around 3 a.m., Albert threw open the connecting door between their rooms and wandered in to see Danny. He was freshly back from his date, smelling like bathtub hooch and unbathed cooch. Danny was right in the middle of an episode of Herculoids. "I got you the cereal you like, buddy," Albert said. He brandished a box of Lucky Charms like it was the Ark of the goddamn Covenant. Danny just stared at him, slack-jawed. "What am I supposed to do with that?" "Are you fucking kidding me?" Albert snarled. With his cigar-thick fingers, he tore open the top of the box, shredded the plastic bag, and grabbed a handful of cereal. "This is what you do with it, Danny. You fucking eat it." He noshed on a mouthful, getting drooly, slimy, green clovers, pink hearts, orange stars, and yellow moons all stuck in his beard. "Oh yeah, Albert? Oh yeah?" Danny got to his feet, his little hands balled into fists. "And how am I supposed to eat this? Where's the bowl? Where's the spoon? Where's the milk? Are you freaking kidding me? What are you, a princess? You eat it like this." He took another handful. "Gross, Albert. Gross. I know what you probably just did with those hands. Once you reach inside that box, I might as well eat a box of turds." Albert tossed the cereal aside. "Do you want a spoon and some milk for your turds, Your Highness?" The Danny started laughing. Whenever Albert got that mad at him, he just cracked up for some reason. And as usual, Albert joined in. Although he didn't actually laugh, he lowered his hackles, he cleared his throat, and he made that sound that he made when he was happy. That was as close to laughing as Albert ever got. Danny stiffened. He closed his eyes and he twitched his nose back and forth. Albert knew what that meant. He clicked off the TV. "Boots, Albert. I hear lots of boots. And guns. I can smell the guns." Albert knew better than to question his partner. When it came to guns, Danny only spoke gospel truth. Is it cops? Danny shook his head. No, the guns are too big, it's soldiers. Danny pulled out a case from under the bed. He selected one of the many handguns inside to slip into his belt, and then a submachine gun to carry. You still got the boom box? He asked. Albert slipped into his room and grabbed it. The boom box was what Danny liked to call the detonator that Albert carried with him. Danny had a hard time remembering the word detonator. The boom box was connected to a small charge down in the pickup, just enough of a pop to ignite all the gas drums and chemicals that Albert stored in the bed. Now? Albert asked. Hold on. Danny opened fire through the door, through the front wall, through the shaded window. He heard the bullets rip through Kevlar and plunge into meat. Okay, now. A click of a button, and boom. The parking lot went into a fireball. Orange and white flames tinged with blues and greens and wonderful blacks. Albert had an exotic array of accelerants, many of which generated toxic fumes. The force of the blast blew out every window in the boarding house. Danny stripped off his shirt, wrapped it around his face, and then leapt through the open window, as sleek and graceful as a murderous gazelle. When he landed on the walkway, both guns were already blazing. He was so fast. He flowed like water, effortless and assured. That blast had knocked the soldiers off balance, and now the chemical fumes were working their magic. Danny moved fluidly through twists and turns and pirouettes that would have made Baryshnikov blush. He wove through those soldiers in black, shooting with every step, tracking and killing people in 2 different directions with 2 different weapons. All the while, never losing a step, never slowing down, never giving Murder One the chance to draw a bead on him. And all the while, this motherfucker was wearing flip-flops. Both guns empty, Danny tossed them aside and used his bare hands to finish off the final 2 soldiers in his path. He saw another one who was running away. That man looked like he was the boss because his body armor was heavier. Danny followed the running man, the last living member of Murder One, all the way back to the support team, which was called Man One. Danny didn't know that, but he killed all 14 of them all the same. He returned to the blaze in the parking lot, soaked through red, dripping with the blood of others, his footfalls flipping and flopping rhythmically. Albert was waiting for him. He offered Danny a cigarette. It smelled like burnt oil, but tasted good. You know, Albert, I kind of freaked out there for a minute. It was really nice of you to bring me that cereal. I just get so mad sometimes. After that, the DRO director decided to yield to Jonestown's advice and not send in Murder 2. Jonestown had a plan. Set up Danny and Albert with a permanent Code Crimson status. That would mean they were flagged and that no other cops or other feds would get too close to them. Let them run wild. Give them a handler and see if the DRO could use money in the pretext of paid hits to get these boys to carry out field assignments. Perhaps in this case it was better if the asset didn't know he was an asset at all. In all likelihood, Danny wouldn't even know what an asset was. Jonestown was never one to miss an opportunity for studying his creations in the wild. So he assigned rookie agent Bill Handel to work with Danny and Albert. Bill would pose as an underworld fixer arranging assassinations. He never told Bill about the connection between he and Danny. That would have tainted the findings of the research. Danny Miller was assigned a permanent Code Crimson status. Before, the Code Crimson had only ever been used for contained locations, never for a person. A Code Crimson is a warning bulletin issued by the DRO to all local law enforcement and first responders, explaining that the potential loss of life outweighed any good that they could do. If you were inside the boundary of a Code Crimson order, the police were powerless to help you. Now, wherever Danny went, the Code Crimson followed him. The DRO had learned dearly the cost of trying to apprehend Danny Miller. Over the course of the next 2 years, Bill Handel guided Danny and Albert to where they were needed to kill who needed to be killed. And then one day, Bill Handel was reassigned. Ultimately, Danny and Albert were the victims of the most common of bureaucratic nightmares: budget cuts. Just as the first wave had been defunded years earlier, the DRO had determined that trying to harness this particular asset was not a judicious use of their funds. Although Danny Miller was probably the most dangerous person alive, he had lines that he wouldn't cross, and that made him less than useful to the dark machinations of the DRO. So, Danny was no longer watched. The Code Crimson was rescinded. The DRO, it moved on to other projects. Danny and Albert were left to their own devices. Someone else's problem now. The lads, of course, were none the wiser about any of this. They didn't know who the DRO were, nonetheless that they had been working for them for 2 years. For Danny and Albert, it was business as usual. Whenever the money ran dry, they never had to look very far to find work. Their nicknames preceded them at this point: Albert the Burn and Danny the Stain. But that was such a long time ago. This is about something later, something important. And it isn't that Danny and Albert didn't keep traveling around having adventures since 1994, but that they had too many adventures. I could talk for hours on end and still not fully recap all the shit that these two went through. Albert took Danny back to the old asylum where he had spent his formative years. At this point, it was a regular occurrence, a pilgrimage of sorts, although neither Danny nor Albert knew what a pilgrimage was. Every couple of years or so, Danny would get the urge to go home, the only home that he'd ever known. Albert never questioned, he always obliged, and dropped Danny off at the front steps of the asylum with a final cigarette and a "see you soon, pal." A month or two later, Albert would pull back up, honk the horn a few times, and then Danny would come out feeling refreshed and recharged. Back when he was a kid, the place couldn't keep Danny Miller inside. He escaped repeatedly, something he would later do at any facility that tried to hold him. Now that he was older, they couldn't keep him out. After the first couple of times, they just stopped trying. After all, it's not like they could call the police to get help. Everyone knew who Danny the Stain was. That Code Crimson might have been rescinded, but common sense was common sense, and fucking around with Danny Miller was anything but sensible. Instead, the hospital staff started leaving his old padded cell free at all times, just in case. They knew that Danny was comforted by the straitjacket, so they left a couple of extras in his cell for him. One of the older nurses even hand-sewed Danny's name onto a straitjacket, just for him, something that he really appreciated. It was 2016. Danny was sleeping peacefully in his cell when there came a soft knock at his door. This had never happened before. No one had ever come inside to see him, not even Albert. In the hall, there was a serious-looking man wearing a suit. "Do you remember me, Danny? My name is Bill. We used to work together a long time ago." Yes? Sorry, no, not really. I mean, you look familiar, but you kind of remind me of the weatherman on the news. Which one? All of them. Okay, I get that, Danny. Listen, I have something pretty important to tell you. It's something that I just found out, and I don't know what it means, but I thought that you should know. Okay? Danny, you and I are brothers. Oh. Like, for real brothers? Yes. How? Well, it's a long story, Bill said, gearing up to explain about the first wave. But Danny waved him off. Nah, I don't like long stories. But you're sure we're brothers? Who's the older brother? And who's the little brother? I am 3 days older than you are. Wow. An older brother. That's crazy, dude. I mean, Bill. It's Bill, right? It's crazy, Bill. Say, are you one of those older brothers that give noogies? Sure, Danny, if you like. Gingerly, as if holding an atomic bomb with its guts hanging out, Bill Handel put his arm around Danny's neck. He balled up a fist and rubbed his knuckles back and forth over Danny's sweaty scalp. "Not too hard! Not too hard!" Danny shrieked in delight, and he laughed and laughed. Thank you for listening to another episode of A Scary Home Companion. If you'd like to hear a little more about Danny and Albert, look up the episode Devil's Night Ride Along. Jonestown and Bill Handel turn up time and again as well, but most notably in Shadow Agent and Company Man. You can find the show on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or contact us directly at scaryhomecompanion@gmail.com. Or, if you really want to help us out, sign up for the Patreon. On the Patreon, aside from all the bonus episodes, we have a master timeline and a master list of cross-referenced characters with their appearances, which really makes it easier to navigate this choppy sea of connections. The episode was produced and edited by Jeff Davidson and features some pretty amazing music. The Butchering give us the Wickedness and the new 1-2. Eva Las Vegas, Crack Whore, Jesus and the Christians with Murder and Ballet, Noiz Complaint with Burn, and the Illegal Ones with Brother of Christ. As always, Chelsea Oxendine with the theme music. or else I come back and I crack your fucking head open. Let's back alley tango and see what hits the floor, you fuck-faced piece of shit. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna see if I can do that angrier.